from Washington, California Congressman, top Democrat on House Intelligence, Adam Schiff. Thank you very much for being with us. First of all, let's talk about John Podestas' testimony. How important was his testimony? What have you learned so far?
Well, I can't go into the particulars. I think it was valuable for him to come and testify before our committee. We're looking at a number of things, obviously, at the issue that most people are focused on in terms of whether there was any coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russians. But we're also looking at issues about U.S. government response. How did the FBI and the DHS respond when they knew that Russia, a foreign adversary, was in the computers at the DNC, was also involved in the hacking of the campaign chair for presidential candidate John Podesta. So we're very interested in U.S. government response. What can we learn from it? How do we protect ourselves in the future and ensure a very timely and strong response?
You've said that the Obama administration should have done a lot more when it found out that there was Russia not only intervening, but also directing it from the highest levels, obviously from Vladimir Putin. What should the Obama administration have done, and why didn't they do more?
Well, you know, they say hindsight is 20/20, but I'm not talking from hindsight here. In real time, Senator Feinstein and I were urging the administration initially to make attribution, to call out Russia publicly on what it was doing. It was clear to Senator Feinstein and I that Russia was the responsible party. And you probably remember, Andrea, that failing to get the administration to do that, Senator Feinstein and I issued our own statement of attribution in September. Ultimately, the administration did issue a statement, but only a written statement signed by 2 administration officials. The president himself didn't speak about this until after the election, didn't seek to impose sanctions at the time the Russians were interfering. I do think that was a mistake. That was what we were urging at the time, that the administration confront Russia on this. It was important, I think, to tell the American people in very plain terms what a foreign adversary was trying to do. Now, I understand the reasons why the administration was hesitant to do that. They didn't want to be seen as interfering or tipping Hillary Clinton. But to me, that was outweighed by the public's need to know. And so I think the administration should have taken a different course than it did.
The president's going to see Vladimir Putin coming up at this summit next week. And as recently as yesterday, there was a blow-up at the White House press briefing when the spokeswoman described it as a Russia media hoax. What does the president have to accept before he sees Vladimir Putin? Or is Putin just going to take the message that they can do anything they want in the next election?
Well, here's the thing. The president this week once again accused his predecessor of illegal or corrupt conduct, saying that Obama was guilty of collusion and obstruction. If the president isn't willing to acknowledge what the Russians did here, if the president isn't willing to confront them, if the president isn't willing to tell the American people, look, I accept this is what the Russians did and both parties need to come together to condemn it, then we can hardly expect him to confront the responsible party, and that is Vladimir Putin, because, of course, our intelligence community has concluded that the orders to do this came from Putin himself. I have to say I go into this with low expectations. What the president should do in that meeting with Putin is say, look, we know what you did. I acknowledge what you did, and we're never going to tolerate that again, and there'll be severe repercussions if you interfere in our elections that way in the future. Moreover, don't expect to have any relief from sanctions, not from me, not from the Congress, until you get out of Crimea, until you refrain from interfering in the internal affairs of your neighbors, as they continue to do with their troops and their proxies in Ukraine. And also, we're happy to make common cause in fighting ISIS, but we are not going to make common cause with you in propping up the regime of Bashar al-Assad. These are some of the messages that the president ought to deliver, but given that he won't even, I think, level with the American people about the Russian interference in the election, it's hard to imagine him confronting Vladimir Putin.
And nor, according to our own reporting, is the administration doing anything from Homeland to protect against hacking in the midterms.
Well, that's another problem, and that is the administration ought to be working closely with the secretaries of state and other elections officials to say, okay, here's what the Russians did. I think they should be much more forthcoming in talking about the extent of Russian probing of elections infrastructure. You know, some of the secretaries of state, including my own in California, have communicated they're not aware of much of what is being now testified to in open session in Congress. So I think the department ought to be much more open with the whole country about the extent of Russian probing of our elections infrastructure, but also ought to be working hand in hand to prepare our states and our local elections people for what may be the next assault on them in the next election.
Thank you so much, Adam Schiff. Thanks for